Pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the next item on the agenda is citizens' comments. We have some citizens on Zoom, and we have a Board of Finance member in the audience. Are here any citizens' comments? Hearing none, we will move on to an educational update.
So I don't really have a full update for this evening, except that last week we only had a short week, which seemed like a very long week because Bill and I were busy putting budget together. But Thursday and Friday went well. We had good attendance. And this is our first full week of the new school year. So happy 2025.
Great. All right, this is our first look at the first discussion of the budget. We are going to listen to the finance director. I hope you had a chance to review it this weekend. So these will be financial questions, really, because the finance director, I know I wrote out some notes on my packet that I printed out this weekend. There are some fundamental numbers, percentages that we need to understand, Bill, so. And then we'll be waiting for some backup schedules further on in the process. So let's get started. We look at the first page and we.
Yeah, so I just wanted to interject before Bill gets going with the summary page. The budget that I proposed to you is $22,400,297.
Right.
It represents a 4.5% increase over FY25. Bill and I have spent a lot of quality time together, putting together this budget. I do want to say for the teachers that are joining us this evening, thank you so much for starting to prepare the budget. It's a long process. We begin this early in November. And it really starts at the grassroots with our teaching staff. They build their budget. It's a zero-based budget. And then, of course, it goes through the process, comes to me for final approval before it gets before the board. So it's gone through that whole long process to the numbers that you see in front of you today. So Bill has all the underpinnings of what makes these numbers up. And now I will shift it to Bill.
Okay.
Thanks, Melinda. As Melinda mentioned, it is a pretty comprehensive and exhausting process, frankly, starting with everyone out in the district, turning in budget sheets accumulated here in this rather large binder. And then we take the first pass through it kind of collaboratively to develop the budget that you have in front of you. As Melinda mentioned, 22.4 million, up 4.5%. With our revalued mill rate, that would represent a 0.8 estimated mill rate impact. A mill this year is roughly $1.1 million compared to $770,000 last year, if I remember correctly. So 0.8 mil with the new reval. Looking district-wide, the drivers, and there probably will be no surprises here, the main drivers, looking at an object view, paraprofessional salaries, pupil services, increased spending in building repairs and maintenance, given some of the initiatives that have been going on this year, that was expected. We also saw an impact with some budget dollars put aside for NEASC and anticipated or potential additional cafeteria related spending, depending on where we shake out with the cafeteria director. So cutting across all the schools, if you will, those were the main drivers sort of from an object code look. I'd like to just walk you high level through each of the departments just to give you a feel for what the main drivers were in each one. At the high school, contractual salary increases offset by position eliminations. The inclusion of the welding pathway supply line. You might, if you remember correctly, that was in, if I remember correctly, that was in curriculum last year and grants.
Correct.
And then, and you'll hear this over and over again, a lower healthcare allocation this time around. All in all, healthcare, we are currently expecting a 10% rate increase. That's from USI through Michelle. That hasn't been updated in a month or so. You'll recall that last year, we updated that about every month or two, we would get a revised estimate. It actually started at 10% last year, drifted down to, I believe, 2% by the end of the budget process. And what was interesting is if you actually look at the increases that actually hit, it was up less than 1%. So in this fiscal year, in fiscal 25, we had some good news against budget because, believe it or not, health insurance increases were lower than we expected. However, as we budget for 2026, the expectation is right now for a 10% increase. As that changes over the budget process, I'll work that into the model and bring those down. At the middle school, contracted salary increases, healthcare rate increases, the 10% did hit here because when I say decrease healthcare allocation, and you guys will remember this from last year's process, but for those in the audience who may not recall, the way salaries and healthcare are budgeted is on an employee by employee basis and how they're coded and how that actually gets to each of the departments, if you will. The changes in the allocation really reflect any changes in positions across the schools or people's changes in coverage. People retire, people get married, people just decide to go on their spouse's coverage. So it's not much of an apples to apples comparison from year to year because there can just be so much change in terms of what people do with their health insurance. It also in the middle school, rate increases actually hit the middle school because there wasn't a heck of a lot of movement in terms of people's types of coverage. We also saw increased substitute teacher budgeting there. At the elementary school, contractual salaries offset by position eliminations, and this is another school that had a lower healthcare allocation. In pupil services, salary increases, an increase in the number of paras, which I'm sure all of you will remember. We had cut several paras from the budget last year. However, IEP requirements required us to bring those folks back on board. Those folks that we brought back on board are in the 2026 budget. So they were not in 2025, they are in 2026. So we have quite a salary swing related to paraprofessionals. We have an increase from year to year in outplacements and pupil services, RBTs and the like. And they got a little help from the lower healthcare allocation there too. In Nurse Grauer's budget, the health budget, the main driver of the increase is just salary increases and I believe a $5,000 increase in the sub usage there. District-wide, we increased the legal budget. We saw some increases in the expected P&C insurance rates for next year. So that increase unfortunately helped hit us negatively. This is where the consulting dollars show up for the cafeteria. Right now, I believe it was $40,000
Yes.
for the side move.
Yep.
And we did get some good news from in a way of lower expected BOAG and QMC tuition. So that helped us out a little bit there. On the plant side, as I mentioned earlier, increased budgeting in repairs and maintenance. Healthcare hit plant pretty hard, offset by fuel savings. I'm pleased to report that for the third year in a row, we will be paying less for fuel oil in 2026 than we did. We're down to $2.66 a gallon versus $2.99 in the 2025 budget. Thanks to Bill, Amy, and I guess myself, we're the informal fuel monitoring committee. And we've managed to call it right for the last few years, so we continue to keep watching. It's probably gonna be tough to beat this year's rates, but we'll give it a shot. Transportation, you're saying, Bill, what the heck happened here? We're down. How can that possibly be? Because DATCO, I knew that. I knew it was gonna be either you, Kathleen, or Steve was gonna be all over that one, so I'm ready for that one. What we did this year, it is a 5% contracted rate increase. That is true. But what I did in calculating this year's transportation budget is I used a 5% increase over our expected spend for 2025, not our budgeted amount from 2025. Because we were expecting to come in under budget.
Okay,
So I saw an opportunity to capture some of that savings to help us with the budget dollars. Melinda and I kind of weighed the pros and cons and decided to go. So this does include the 5% rate increase. However, it's based on projected actual, and that's why in total you see a decrease from year to
well,
year.
that
And
makes,
Bill, if I may, with the enrollment dropping, one of the things that I have yet to do and sit down with DADCO and really look at bus usage. Our contract requires X amount of buses at, I don't know, 385 a day. There is a penalty clause that if we reduce a bus, we're charged $75 per day. However, if we don't need the full fleet that we're running now, it might be worth the exercise to sit down with DADCO and just see if there's a bus or two that can be eliminated on any of the routes. So that's some of the work I want to do in the next month or so, as we're going through the whole process. Is there a possibility that there could be some additional savings there?
well, that makes sense.
Also contributing to that decrease on the fuels side, we're also down from the prior year. In 2026, we'll pay $2.70 per gallon of diesel versus $3.06 in 2025. So that was a nice savings there. High school athletics, we see increased supplies and technical services offset by lower coaches and referee salaries. Technology, the increase is primarily Chromebook replacements, 115 of them currently budgeted, and replacement laptops of 10. Middle school athletics, the increase was nominal. On the curriculum side, the $29,000 increase is primarily the addition of the CNA certification and scuba pool time expenses. If I remember right, both of those were grant funded last year.
Not the pool expenses, but the CNA certification for the last 2 years have been funded by a grant through EWIB. And they did tell me this year that would be, this would be the final year. They're working with me on a CDC certification and another grant project. So we have to absorb that cost. And we are currently looking at 10 students for next year becoming CNA certified, and it's around $2,200 a student.
ESY, the primary driver there is contracted salary increases. So those are the main drivers from an object code view, but also from a department specific view. I'd like to remind the board, of course, I welcome all of your questions at any time. But I'd also like to keep in mind, everyone to keep in mind that we do have the joint meeting with the Board of Finance scheduled. And in that meeting, that's the meeting that we would like to frankly do some planning tonight and really pick the board's brain a little bit about how we'd like to approach that, because that's when we expect to have each of the directors in with a slide or two on their own specific budget and to sort of walk you through their thinking behind what we're driving their budget, so that hopefully we capture some of the same type of value this year with the Board of Ed / Board of Finance discussions that we did last year with the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed or Board of Finance discussion.
Okay.
So just a reminder there.
Well, when the directors go through it, they're gonna highlight, the increases, decreases. And I marked up some questions that I had. Is there a way to break out the salaries by the percentage increase in salary versus the step increase to come to the total?
Yeah, I can do some, I mean, with teachers, it's predominantly step increases.
correct.
You
I mean,
have some noise in there in terms
right.
of
I mean,
teacher-
our average increase in the budget was, I believe, kind of see that it's 3% in most cases, but in several cases, it differs a little bit.
It does because, well, especially in the teacher lines, this year, we have some position eliminations that are rolling through there where salaries have gone away, that would change that. And then in some instances, you have, new teachers who may have joined in 2026
Mhm.
that came in at a higher step than the person they're replacing. I guess in theory, that could go the other way, although if I remember right, Melinda,
Well, we-
usually it's,
I usually track that. Lately it has not been. To get the position filled, we're usually hiring more experienced teachers.
But when we do that reconciliation sheet between the two budgets, we typically break out
Yep.
the additional, the new heads versus we're actually taking away some people this year.
Yep.
Versus bringing in people. The staff that is remaining stays as salary increase, and that we could break out of, this is
Yep.
due to wages and this is due to staff. And then the change in staff is separate to get, between the two budgets to equal that 900 something
Sure.
thousand.
Yep.
My question is, when I looked at the FICA, that seemed to be way out of, if you look at a FICA line,
yep,
if, for example, just look at the high school.
Yep.
That went up 245%.
that's really a function of how it was budgeted in 2025.
Okay,
So this year, so for up for probably all prior history up until this budget cycle. That line, I think, was just sort of increased generally roughly by the amount of the expected salary increase. I treated it more like we do the healthcare insurance this year.
okay, so it actually is a percentage
So
of the
it's-
salary.
It's a specific expectation, and it's a little wonky with the school because the teachers don't pay FICA.
Right.
So
Mm,
there's a little more noise that's introduced there too.
okay, all right,
But I have a supporting schedule that,
all right.
Yep.
That's fine. It just seems like, I don't pay that much.
right, and it's, yeah, it's a little unusual.
Okay. And then you've got high school admin, other objects. What is other?
That is the NEASC.
Yeah.
Oh, the NEASC, okay.
For the NEASC visit, that's what we've used that line in the past for their last visit, so that's why we budgeted there this year.
And then we've got English salary. Did we add we've added another teacher there? Cause it's gone up $65,000.
What line number?
Yeah.
That is line 63 in the high school.
I have a note here, the prior year we had budgeted low, but I'll dig into that one a little bit more.
Yeah, it went up 37%, $65,000.
Same staff as last year, so.
Did somebody get reassigned?
No, same three teachers.
Well, somebody got a hell of a raise.
We did bring somebody in, Bill, if you remember, we had a teacher resign and we brought in another teacher, but he was making less money than the teacher that
Yeah,
left.
I'll
Yeah, but
check.
he's now budgeting for 3 people for a full year.
Yes,
Okay, versus two people partial year, then a third came in.
but I want to think November-ish of last year.
I can
Yeah.
compare
You want to check that because that's $65,000. So you wouldn't make 65 in 2 months. Right. Yeah. Okay, the industrial tech salary or line salary. That went up 31,000. That now line number 72. I want to just get answers so that
Yep.
I understand these. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
Oh,
Kristen.
sorry. I was just gonna ask Bill while you were on the teacher if you can put again, I think we had talked about it last year, how many staff are in each of those, when it just says like gen ed, $1 million.
Yeah.
Like how many salaries is that?
Right, because the public, when they see.
Yeah,
the
they're gonna-
Budget, they say, oh my gosh, English salary, someone's making
Right,
blah, 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 but it's 3 teachers.
Yeah.
Right,
You know?
what we had done
Same
last
thing with
year,
custodian salary, you know, it's
Yeah.
like $500,000, and they're
we
gonna.
had, I think we had put the average salaries in the object code definition sheet that you had mentioned.
Oh,
earlier.
okay, that'll go in the hyperlink,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we leave the high school?
I've got a few, but they're in general.
Okay,
And sorry, on the front page too, could you put, because you mentioned what the drivers were for health services, but they're not written on
well, they'll
here,
be in the package.
so that'll help.
30%.
I know, I'm just letting people see this, like, why does this one not have, it's like the only one without a.
Why doesn't it have a descriptor?
Yeah.
Yeah,
like, I feel
okay.
like people are gonna be like,
Oh.
It was,
yeah, I'm
it
sorry.
was nurse sub
I probably
coverage.
should have mentioned that.
Sure.
I looked at. Hold on, I have it. I set a scope of a change of more than $20,000.
okay,
And those are the two. Actually, I'm sorry, it was 10. So health services was only up 6,000 and middle school athletics was only up 1,900, so it fell
Okay.
below my scope.
Thank
But I can go ahead and add it. That's,
I'm trying to think of like Heather mentioned from a town perspective.
Sure. All right. Okay. We all set to move on from the high school now?
I mean, I can ask my questions whenever they're general enough, so if you've got a list here.
Yeah, let's just work our way through. Okay,
Yep.
we're moving on to the middle school. I have a question on line 72 on the tech scat salary. You may have answered these, but let's. I just want to write notes. So this is the industrial tech salary.
Mhm. We hired somebody at a higher rate of pay.
Pardon me?
We hired someone at a higher rate of pay.
What is the activity salaries? What does that pertain to? That is line, I'm sorry, that's line 90.
so that's various stipend positions. I can get you the detailed list.
Okay.
Sorry, this might be a question for Melinda. On 104, I noticed in the middle school and the elementary, there's now no media center salary. Are we not having a librarian?
She's grant funded on Alliance.
Okay, Lance Grant. Okay, well, that's a good,
I was worried.
well, that's great. Grants funded. Okay, I'm going back to the sub line 95. So we've increased our subs.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's in response to looking at the last 2 years of history. Sub usage has been trending up and we've been under budget, we under budgeted in both lines the last 2 years. So I was trying to correct that for 2026.
Okay.
Is that just the middle school or are we seeing that across the board?
Not seeing it across the board. I think the middle school might have been the worst.
Teacher fatigue or, the reason for it or?
Well, it depends if a teacher goes out long-term or not, and we've
Okay.
had several pregnancies and
Okay.
people are out for long-term.
Again, the FICA, but you've explained that. And we brought on more paras again in the middle school.
Yes, that's the same trend from unfortunately we had cut last year, so.
And that's due to a general trend across the.
Well, we had
state.
removed the paras from the budget last year
Okay,
and then we had to hire them.
back,
So they're in the actual and we anticipate them being here again next year, so we
And that's
budgeted for it.
due to more IEPs and,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Wasn't that mostly the elementary? I can remember them being in the middle school.
It's so many of them are at the elementary. We've added 6 to 8 unbudgeted positions so far this year in special education, and those are one-on-one or, as of last Friday, a CNA and another para. And those are unbudgeted on top of the 6 to 8 that we added over the summer.
But these are in gen ed.
Well, we do have kindergarten paras
But
also.
this isn't,
Yeah, it's
this
middle
isn't the
school.
middle school. Apparently we've added $46,000 worth of paras.
Middle
General
school,
paras.
yeah.
It's probably roughly two.
I don't think there's a para at the middle school that's doing gen ed. They're all,
That might be it, there may be. This may be a situation where they were in middle school at one time and they're working in
They
elementary
moved.
school now, and it just hasn't, the coding hasn't been.
yeah. Because
And
the,
unfortunately, that happens sometimes when people stay in the role but move between schools. Sometimes the change doesn't make it up to.
the only gen ed paras we have are the 3 that are in kindergarten. The rest are all 4. And what was that number? 27, 28, 29? We were batting that back and forth on Friday. I think it was up there.
Well, can we check that then? Because we've got $73,000 in the middle school for general para salary.
Most of those 28, 29 pairs that you were speaking of, Melinda,
Mhm.
just now,
Or
those are one-on-ones.
I think like every special ed room has a. para.
please,
Every special ed room has a para, right? They're not all one-to-one.
they're not all one-to-one. Some are program paras where they're in a classroom at like Life Skills. Judy Farley has a para. She has more than one para in there.
But a good majority, I mean, how much of that 28, 29 that you were just speaking of in the elementary school? Under pupil services, how many of those are one-on-ones?
I would say a good, oh geez,
2/3 of them?
yes. Easy, but you know what? I can get that number breakdown for you as to who's one-on-one, who's a program para, and who's a gen ed para. So I can definitely, Chris keeps
So could we
meticulously.
be double
track of that.
counting here?
I mean, the one-on-ones are important to know because that's one of those questions where if the student moves out of the district, that's a budgeted para that goes away or can get moved or.
Let's take a real close look at the paras, so I don't want to be double counting here.
Yep.
And again, the health insurance, but that's fine.
So Melinda, if I might. Rebecca Cody, Michelle Johnson, and Caris Mikma are the 3 that are hitting that code, although it looks like Michelle and Carissa maybe special ed belong.
They are special
Pupil
ed.
service.
Rebecca does support IEPs too, so I don't know if we need to recode her. Initially, years ago, she was a building para back in the day
That's
when we
okay.
had,
That's what I
building
mentioned there.
paras. but we don't have those at the middle or the high
So
school
to
level.
address the concern about the possibility of double counting,
Mhm.
every para salary that is in here is connected to a specific employee. There's no general bucket and the
Okay.
like. It's, you can, the way it's set up.
But if
it's like
they
baseball
belong-
here,
Yeah,
it's
can
just
it
by
Can
person.
it can they be recoded to the right department that they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah, because I'd rather, if they belong in special pupil services, that's where they need to be, because. Any other questions about the middle school? And we'll move on to the elementary school. I'm assuming that the increase in the math by 100% is for our math incentives.
There is an increase for math lab. Is
Okay,
that what you're,
well, instructional supplies, yeah.
130.
130, thank you.
Yeah. Which is a good thing.
Oh, actually, that's Bridges Materials. Those are the consumable workbooks.
Okay, that's a good thing.
Was that they went up because student count went up, or they went up because supplier went up?
They went up because we had a stockpile. We had some and we now have to replenish. And we usually buy 1 or 2 years worth of those consumables.
I guess the way we look at the budget, when we do things like that, it's very,
And there's an. We would have to go back into the budget sheets and take a look at that, Bill. I'll take a look at that.
I mean, I guess what I'd like to say on that is I'd rather be purchasing them annually than every other year take 100% hit on the line,
Just
I
in
got it.
time.
just because we're looking at it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a cost benefit to
It's
buying
like
them
a, it's like
that
a
way.
bulk. Right.
And if there is, if there's a cost benefit to buying it that way, then that's justifiable, but. My opinion, that's supply money, we should be able to shift. You know, it should be a supply line of. Whatever it is, average of $4,500 a year and shift it. Based on where we need it.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to dig deeper into that and find out exactly what's behind that. I know Patty did, want some additional assessment materials. I don't know if she put it, that ended up in those lines.
Well,
Yeah, there's
we'll
also
look
an
at that, that would be good.
There's also an 88% increase right on the line below it for math textbooks. So,
Might be it.
Which line is math lab under? now?
We're at 131 right now.
No, I wanna know where math lab is. I know Mr. Prentice was gonna budget for it now this year. Like,
Yeah.
what does it fall under?
Bill, where do we put math lab? It's there, cause I know we put it in.
yes, I remember when we had.
I remember when we added it too, but we created a line for that, didn't we?
Yes, other salaries tutoring,
'Cause
line
it-
one
Yeah,
sixty-two.
that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
That right?
Yes, it is right.
Because that's the line, when we're paying them. It goes, it appears as tutoring.
I had a question too on 134. Why is that one preschool salary, or why is the preschool separate from the gen ed elementary school salaries, or what is?
So. I think that's a portion of each of the preschool teachers' salaries, because some of it is on school readiness.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep,
Thank
and I
you.
think that's why historically we've had a separate line there,
Okay.
because those positions are split with a grant
Okay, thank you.
every year.
Yeah, so it doesn't make up one person's
It's
salary,
every
it's a
part of it.
percentage of each.
Okay, thank you. What is preschool other salaries?
Did you hear that, Bill?
Sorry, but,
Yep.
one
Preschool
thirty-seven.
other salaries. Oh, that, what is that?
I think that's where there may be some tutoring-like activities that hit that line.
But you just said math lab on there. Where's math lab?
Math
One
lab is
six-
162.
two.
162 math lab.
No, that's tutoring. That's math lab.
Yes.
Okay, that went up, but that's fine. Doubled that. No, more than doubled that. Okay. That's math lab. Okay. And again, if I could. And we still have general paras, again, in the elementary school, although they went down. We're gonna look at the paras and make sure they're classified properly, okay? I mean, if they need, they really, if they have to be in special ed, the more we put into special ed and classify properly, that's better off we'll be, I
And
guess.
is that right, even the 169? Cause if
No,
revised budget should match then if we're keeping all the same pairs that we had for kindergarten and stuff.
I think those
Right.
might be the three kindergarten pairs.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But wouldn't it match what 2025 was, not go down? Why is it down?
It depends on.
169?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, because we didn't have 4 paras last year, gen ed paras.
I'd have to compare what we.
I don't know,
Okay.
have Bill look
Yeah.
at it.
Right,
Let's-
that,
let's
that's
figure this one
75 is
out.
roughly parents.
I got that as a no.
Yeah, those would be the kindergarten, and that's, all we have 3 paras, right?
And what line they go to.
Yeah.
Mine's 149,150. I assume that that's just a shift. That's what it looks like to me. It went from general instruction supplies to general other supplies.
Yeah, that, I mean, that is, those categories are somewhat interchangeable, and it
Yep.
really depends on what specific teachers have. Any teacher can hit either of those lines.
Yeah, it just look, when you add them up, it's like 17, 18,000, give or take, and then.
Yeah.
That might just be a convenient coincidence.
Okay,
There's a million cats in each one of those lines. I mean, we're literally talking Post-its and
okay,
paper clips and.
Okay.
Or actual, you know, whiteboard markers, that type of stuff.
Yeah, but I wonder why that is, so we'll have to look at that.
I mean, there's a significant drop in one, jump in the other, but
Yeah.
and that's percentage wise, but when you look at the actual dollars.
Yeah.
It's between those two lines, it's pretty even. So.
You know, I don't know if we can, are we still doing elementary or are you?
No, we can move on if you
Okay.
want. Are we done with elementary? Anybody have any elementary? We can move on to pupil
I just
services.
didn't know what 175 is. It just says pupil services, 560,000 up from.
Yeah,
70.
that pupil services account is where RBTs and Melinda, what's the other one?
Contractual services, BCBA, consultation, all of that. Risk assessments.
Sorry about that.
That line is really based on, and Chris will speak more to that, but it's to provide educational services for special education students on site rather than send them out of district. So the least restrictive environment. but it's costing us more and more. And if you saw the letter I sent today and the CAPS letter, that was one of my big drivers, is that to keep kids in district, it's costing us more and more.
So Bradley falls under pupil services, right?
So Bradley's
no,
in out of
Brad.
district tuition.
Correct. The line above the Justin.
Okay.
They're actually considered even though they're on site, they're considered an off-site placement.
And there should be a subsequent balancing tuition line to that somewhere, right? We're taking tuition in for some of those
It-
Bradley students, correct?
We get a
It's that
discount.
same
We don't
line.
take anything in. We
It's
just
a
get a
discount.
discount.
But there's students that are coming from out of district
Correct.
into the Bradley program that are
Correct.
paying a tuition, right?
They pay it to Bradley, and then after a certain threshold, Bradley gives us another discount. That's how
On our
that works.
students that are in the program.
So it shows up in the budget as lower tuition in that line. Lower fees in that line.
What's the net? How do
Depends
we
on
find
the
the net?
year.
That's the net.
So Chris will break it out on
But
his
it's not
slide.
just Bradley, it's
Yeah.
all other outplacements too.
Okay.
I know what you're getting at, because we do have, students that come in from what, 7 sending districts.
Right.
But what we get, we don't get any cash for that.
Right.
What we get is when we hit a certain threshold, not how many students it is, then our overall costs drop again.
I guess I'm trying to understand, there was. The Bradley program was sold to us townspeople. As it's beneficial to our district to host it, it's
Correct,
I don't wanna say it makes us money, but it balances out.
it does.
I'd like to see the numbers that show us that it's still balancing out.
That's what Chris does on his slide.
Okay.
He will show that to you.
Okay.
Yep.
Why is Chris getting a bigger raise than the rest of the administrators when they have a contract?
Please.
I believe on Chris's line, I'll check this, but I believe last year we did not budget for his doctoral stipend. This year.
Correct.
Oh, okay, he has a doctoral stipend, okay.
Right.
Okay, that answers my question.
Dr. Jones.
Yes.
And I don't understand the Medicare piece, what? It costs us money for Medicare?
Yes, we pay, just like FICA,
Oh,
it's
okay.
a payroll tax, an employer payroll tax.
So that's the 1.25%?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Never mind, I'm thinking of our Medicare reimbursements.
Yeah, I think that's around what, 10, 11,000?
Unfortunately, it's
lot.
not that significant.
And where does that what does that offset?
Let me look that up. I'm not sure what.
We talked about that, but I don't think we came to the conclusion on that. Okay, it's not a lot of money though, that.
No, but
No.
still,
Yeah, show up somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. There's 3 line items that are high school special ed teacher sub salary, all with no budget for this year. It's 180, 185,
Mm-hmm.
and 190. So why don't, obviously it would be one, I don't know why it's 3 separate things, but where is the sub budget for them?
If you look a couple columns over in the projected spend, those dollars weren't spent,
Okay,
so they weren't budgeted this year.
they don't have subs? I don't see any.
Typically, these paras,
It says teacher subs, special ed teacher subs.
Typically, we don't get special ed teacher subs. That's
So
typically
it
what
probably
happens.
be hitting the regular sub line. And it's a relatively, I tried to go through it in instances where we have there, because every now and then you'll turn up an account where we've just sort of historically budgeted that year after year after
Yeah,
year, and
and
if
it
it's
doesn't
not
get
getting
used.
hit with spend,
Yeah.
eventually at some point I cut it from the budget. Because let's face it, we could use the dollars somewhere where we are spending them. Good question.
It must be coded under gen ed, right? Bill, you don't pull it out separately as far as subs.
It must be, but I think it's gotta be relatively minor.
Yeah.
Because even when we budgeted it, we only budgeted a couple $1,000.
Did we replace the autism teacher? Cause they're not getting much of a raise. That's the last line, 204.
We didn't replace her. It's the same teacher, but
Could be top step,
she's at top step.
yeah, that's
Mm.
probably it.
But still should have gotten more than,
Percent raise, yeah, that doesn't look right, Bill.
yeah. That's line 204.
The salary's correct. But that might be right, though, from FY 25 to FY 26. I don't have the contract in front of me, but that could be correct.
Think it's pretty close to being correct,
Yeah.
if I recall.
Or maybe, I don't know. This- Okay,
What's the, just in general, what's the volatility in the pupil services year over year over the last, say, 5 years? Has it been? I mean, I feel like there's been a steady increase, but I feel like the increase has been significantly offset by certain actions that Melinda and or the board has taken on it, so. I guess what I'm trying to understand is. It's projected as, so it's proposed budget of a 5.3 million, give or take, right? What's at a 10% increase, what's been that volatility? Over the last, say, 5 years, 10 years, if we want to get curious on it.
I mean, I can tell you what drives the volatility. It's the specific kids that come and go.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the year over year, maybe 2 year, 3 year volatility on that line. Where do we get? We know from years of experience, pupil services is our most volatile line on our entire budget, right? We could budget for 5.3 million and come September of next year, that could be $1 million one way or another, right?
Yep.
What I'm trying to understand is we should have enough data sitting somewhere that shows us what the volatility of that line is. And I think that's gonna be important to get across next week to our Board of Finance partners is we do our best and we nail down 90% of this budget. And that one major department could throw us 5% one way or another.
So some of the explanation.
Yeah.
So some of the explanation is, it depends on what the student's disability is. And then it depends on the out of district placement that was sending them to, right? So one child might cost us $125,000 for tuition, where another one may cost us in the low 50s. So depending on what the student's disability is, that's why that tends to fluctuate. But I'll have Chris try to dig out some data for you that can give you maybe some trends in that.
Yeah,
line.
I mean, you know,
But even that, wouldn't that be constant over time? Because a blind kid is gonna be blind through his ear, or a deaf child or whatever. But, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but do we have enough? Is a lot of this volatility, people just moving in this year, next year?
Oh, yeah.
It's
Is
moving in
that,
and moving out.
is that what it is? But
And DCF.
because everything being equal, a placement at Grow is gonna be a placement at Grow, or a placement at American School for the Deaf is American School for the Deaf. And that's not really gonna change. We'll see little salary changes here and there, but what are the big, why, I mean, are people moving into town just to take advantage of this? I don't know if that's what you were getting at.
I mean, it's partially that, and it's partially trying to explain the volatility on the line. I think it's because of where we are positioned right now, budget wise for people services, right? Or let me step back. As of our last Board of Ed meeting, we were 1.1, 1.3 in the whole pupil services, or sorry,
It was 900 change.
Okay.
Before special ed excess cost.
right. Where are we? But last year, we were ahead of the game at this time,
Yes.
right? So
Well,
I'm
no,
trying to,
last year- Now, we were right where we're at now, but we ended up having kids leave. And that brought that number down.
okay. I guess what I'm trying to explain, what I would like to try to explain both to our Board of Finance partners as well as the townspeople in general, is how volatile this line is.
Yeah.
From year to year.
Yep.
Right, it's not gonna be, we can't budget this line as well as we can budget high school, elementary school, because we know our enrollment, we know what we have to provide for teachers, we know what we have to provide for state mandated services, that we can plan and predict. 5 kids could move into town tomorrow and we could be $1 million. This budget jump. Because the entire family needs services.
Right.
Right? I also think it's important that when we do comparisons like you just did, the $50,000 student versus the $120,000 student, the $50,000 student is completely on the town's tax burden.
Right.
Correct.
Where the $120,000 tax burden, we get on excess cost payback.
Mm.
Right, there's that, and getting. I know when I speak to people in town, getting them to understand. That an individual student has to meet. Whatever number that is, what is it this year, 95?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has to meet 90-something thousand dollars worth of services individually before the state pays back the percentage. So we could have 50 students, each $50,000. Or we could have 25 students at $100,000, that makes the difference.
We just to back up your point, Justin, we have, because we pay the bills at the same time every month. We have quite a few students who are in that $48,000 to $56,000 range that are in pupil services.
I mean, if the state turned around and said, look, based on your district, your overall spend on this chunk of students is X, we're gonna reimburse you that. That would benefit us a little bit better than where we're at with this with the way they calculate the excess cost grant today.
That's true.
But legislation has to change for that to happen for us.
Yes, we can do that.
How many speech pathologists did you budget for this year? Is it still gonna be the one in her?
So there are 2 full-time and then we contract for the third. There's Lauren and who's the other lady? I don't know her well. Yeah, there's 2 full-time and then we contract for the third.
My only other comment, Melinda, on special ed, is. And I don't know how we're gonna do this. Appropriately. There are a lot of people that look at special ed and say outplacements and they go, okay, it's a child that has. A sensory disorder that can't handle school. But they don't understand that that also includes expulsions. They don't understand that that also includes those behavioral. Can't make it in a general classroom within our facility. We can't provide the services for that. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna rely on the education professionals in the room to come up with how we're gonna best communicate that. But I didn't know until I sat down with Chris, that when we expel a student or when a student is outplaced due to some other people think that a special ed student is somebody who dyslexia, somebody who you know, has a,
It could be
was
behavior,
born with
right?
one hand,
Yeah.
right? That's what they, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be politically incorrect. I'm just trying to get this thought out. That's what people think of when they think of special ed, right? They think of wheelchair, they think of that kind of stuff. What they don't think of when we talk about special ed, when we talk about pupil services, what they're not thinking of is those behaviorals that have to get sent out to a different. It is a form of special ed, it's just not one that's commonly thought.
Well, with 200 students with IEPs, which means they all have a diagnosed disability, and only 24 of them being an out of district placement. Left back is what, the 175 kids that all require some type of specialized services, and then depending on what their needs are, it could go either way, and people don't understand that left behind outside that 24 out of district placement kids, we're still providing. That's where that contractual service line gets up to 560,000. If we recall years ago, that line was almost down to nothing, right? We never budgeted appropriately in that line for contraction services. So I'm glad that bill captures everything in that line, but I agree with you. It's hard to understand.
I guess where I'm trying to get is with, especially with pupil services, we need to communicate everything that's thrown into that bucket.
Okay,
Because even I didn't understand everything that was thrown in that bucket. I thought, okay, my kid's getting reading services, that's what was thrown into the bucket. I didn't understand that when we expelled a student or when we removed a student from the general classroom or when things like that happen to protect the safety and sanctity of the general ed classroom, it throws it into this line.
risk assessments go into that line. Every time we have a risk assessment meeting and we send a student out for an assessment to say that they're safe to come back to school, it's $3,500 every time.
Legal services, you know, all of the lawyer fees that go into this type of stuff. That's all stuff that I think needs to get explained as part of pupil services. When you look at the overall budget, pupil services is 5.3 million. Compared to the high school, compared to the middle school, compared to the elementary school.
Yeah.
That single department. Not to mention every single, there are pieces of the pies in the other departments that also contribute to pupil services that we don't see because it's not a direct line for line. My opinion, based on what I know and what I see, I would say that pupil services overall to the district is probably closer to 6 million-ish. If you were to include everything that's being provided as part of pupil services.
And
Yeah, if you could
transportation.
throw in the math lab and the reading specialists and the,
Well, yeah, not even that, but the
That's true.
extended classrooms, the, you know, the para that might share a spot, things like that, that aren't. You know, a general para who actually has to help the other para, the special ed para.
Yeah.
It's things like that that just, when you know what's going on the ground and when you see the budget lines. There's a little bit in there that's really not called out, and I think some of it just needs to get explained. I mean,
Oh, it's a big number.
again, I had, after Chris informed me of what's included in that pupil services bucket. And I explained it to a couple members of the Board of Finance. I got wide open eyes. So I think between identifying those and identifying the volatility in that line.
Well, that's gonna help us shape up our presentation, or at least Chris's presentation, when we're all together with the Board of Finance as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack that, Kathleen. My apologies.
any other questions for pupil services? No? Okay, we can move on now to the health department. Any questions there?
What's an adult education assessment?
So, we are mandated by law to provide adult education services. We get some grant funding from the state for adult ed, somewhere around the neighborhood of 50,000. And the Board of Ed also has to pay 50,000 to East Con to provide an adult ed program.
What's in
So,
the budget should be that fit.
Yep.
54.
Okay.
54.
I was afraid maybe I hadn't accounted.
No, I just didn't know
for
what
the,
it
Somewhere in that, well, I know it's
Correct.
around 100,000 or better, that East Con takes our grant money, and then they also take the Board of Ed budget for that.
And how many adults do we have using the services?
I can look into that, because I've been dying to know that number,
Yeah.
and I just haven't called. I don't know.
Probably getting ripped off.
Well, after my last week's meeting with East Con,
Well, that would be a good number to know. If we have 3 adults going,
we're
Well,
still
we had
mandated.
0 and we're paying 54 grand. That's a
Yeah,
different story.
actually, we're
Actually,
paying
well,
104 grand.
Yeah.
But it is mandated by law unless we decide to take over adult ed programming here in district, and I don't think we have the capacity for that. But I
But if
will,
we have 0,
I don't know how that works. We've just always paid that bill.
East Con, the only,
65
is
maybe?
East Con the only spot that can provide that?
We've toyed around with it in district, and especially now that the welding program is here, wouldn't it be beneficial to the community to try to look at something like that, a more voc tech?
Well, I'm only thinking that if there's only 2 or 3 and
Mhm.
Putnam might do it, why wouldn't we pick Putnam?
Putnam, the region goes to East Con.
I'm just saying, you
Yeah.
know, if we could take it over ourselves, who's to say that Putnam or Plainfield didn't take it over? That maybe we don't know about. I mean,
Yeah.
when was the Board of Health? Or
Yeah,
the Board of
NECOG.
Finance a couple of years ago that they had to pay this and they said no.
Right.
And it changed, they changed their rate or whatever it was. At some point, we have to say, no, we're not paying it. And I'm not saying we do it here. But we should try to say, no, we don't send anybody. Nobody in Thompson is taking advantage of this. We understand it's law. We're not paying $50,000, we'll pay you $24,000, something like that.
Pay you nothing. You got our grant for 50 grand. So there. That's,
It's just,
I just-
I like standing up to people once in a while. The Board of Finance did it.
well, let's
The Board of
justify
Finance
the
did it a couple
54.
of years ago and it worked.
Well, I think NECOG and EastCon have kind of thought that they've cornered the market on some of these things as
Exactly.
well, right? And
Exactly.
it's,
I mean, we may
Takes
have
a little
some
bit of
English as
pushback
a second
sometimes,
language
but place.
people going there. But
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I will look into
yeah,
it.
please do. It's a lot of money. We could use it. If it's not already being used. If it is, yeah, that's fine.
the, I don't know if we're down this far yet, but the district-wide telephones,
What number is that?
284. I don't know if we got that for you. I skipped some other stuff that people need, but
Hmm?
station number 4. District-wide telephone.
Yeah.
We're up 18%. It's $19,000.
Maybe somebody else has a new telephone. Where are you?
284. 284.
Yeah, we're due to have the Verizon representative come in and talk about redoing the whole.
That's mobiles.
Please,
That's mobile phones.
mobile phone,
I think that's our phone,
or is it,
landline phone.
oh, it's our
Phones
landline?
are
Each, I
here
saw
are
yeah,
handled through
individual departments.
reimbursement.
Yeah.
So that,
Contract has something built in.
that's the landlines? Oh, okay.
Is that another one of those that's split with the town kind of thing, Bill, or?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know.
It's just $19,000 for phones kind of blows my mind. Somebody's getting a good deal. It's not us.
How many phones do we have?
Oh.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah, but we should have our own exchange. It's an 860 something, something, something exchange. But to be paying 19,000, I mean. There
That's
are
a
massive businesses in Worcester that are not paying 19,000 and they got 5 lines at every desk.
Heather, can you shed some light on that line?
So we do have a PRI service that we're paying for. I'd have to get more information on that because it's been a couple years since we changed over. So I can look into that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one of those that I would just sit here and go, oh. I mean. We have to have landlines, I get it, but $20,000 for landlines,
We also have I don't know if we pay extra for Heather, do we pay extra for the interconnected lines?
That I'm not sure.
No,
I just think an assessment is warranted, I mean.
We
At
do
19,000.
we share the cost with the town. And I'm not sure how much.
Okay, so if we share the cost with the town, it's.
Right, so it's gonna be a lot
It's
more.
even
than-
more.
It's even more, which hurts me even more.
yeah,
I mean, just as much as we negotiate fuel, this is another one of those where we should be talking to somebody, this and our internet and.
Telecommunications committee,
Yeah.
go along with OPEC.
Well, yeah, and on the same vein, the copier leases jumped by quite a bit too.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's.
I have that written
down.
Okay.
I have, that's a
So-
question of
So
mine
we
too.
Renewed, and Heather back me up on this because I think I got it right. The number that's in there for the leases now all includes essentially all of the imprints for this year, whereas in the past, the actual copies would hit a separate line. So when we renegotiated it this year, it's included. I'm anticipating the next question. I'm not sure what that other line was.
Yeah, to see a deduct. Yeah.
But we, just so the board knows, we got essentially all new copiers this summer
yes.
for no
No
increase
increase.
related to the machines. It was pretty flat, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Because no, unfortunately, the copiers that we had,
We're awful.
nobody liked them.
So this isn't somebody kicked it penalty, this is just.
No. No, it's actually, the contract assumes a certain number of copies. And this contract, previously used to assume a certain number of copies, and this one includes all. Which is why it essentially looks like it went up, but it's all concentrated in that line this time, where it wasn't in the past.
It was partially from my line, which is why I was over last year.
How many copiers do we have? I mean,
I wish Matt was here.
but. These are copier printers, right? The staff prints to these as well.
Yeah.
They're not individual printers on staff's
No.
desks. Okay, all right, that's. I'm good.
We got rid of all of those, although they keep trying to sneak back in and we
Yes.
keep pushing them back out, but no, they have
Linda
to.
does her book review. I think you caught, not this year, there wasn't one in. there this
Last
but
year, I
think
got it
and the
last year.
before you caught one both times.
I mean, I get it if it's required as part of the curriculum in that classroom, like, if one's needed in the. Welding classroom or the shop classroom to print out drawings or prints or something like that, so they don't have to walk down the hall to get a copy. I can understand that, but. In an English classroom, if they want their own copier too.
No, they have to print to the main.
Okay.
And then if they want color, Danielle prints them.
Maybe.
Everyone-
Everyone is scrutinized about
Everyone's
color. Really, it's the early childhood building that uses a lot of color, and then sometimes athletics for her programming. Yeah.
You might notice that even your sheets are no longer in color.
There today.
You must have printed it at home.
Special. What struck me is line
My mom used to tell me that too.
C6, it's kind of a sad situation, the whole.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not questioning it, I'm just saying it's a sad situation.
and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but in that line, does it include DCF placements where we have to negotiate between districts, like we pay one way and they pay the other, depending on the
Homeless
placement?
transportation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
that back and
We've
forth.
seen, I remember when I started, that budget was very small, but in the last 3 years, that
Yeah.
year after year after year. It's climbed.
But,
We have no recourse, although we're trying to. Chris is trying to worm his way into some of those meetings. They just make decisions and then we get the bill. And he's trying to be part of the decision-making process before we get the bill, so he can better understand why we're getting the bill.
Well, that's a good thing to bring up when we have the Board of Finance too. He can bring that up in his discussion. Not that it's a whole lot of money, but it is
It
money
is.
that we could use in other
where
places.
was that?
It's
266.
And why doesn't that fall under pupil services?
Because homeless students aren't necessarily special ed. And DCF placements aren't necessarily special ed. It is for obvious reasons for
But
it.
pupil services. Expulsions aren't necessarily special ed, but they fall under pupil services.
Yeah, we've always called out homeless pupil transportation because we get, do we apply any grant money against that?
I'm fine with the separate
Last
line.
year, we had a grant that it was $5,000.
That's right.
That we were able to use to absorb some of those costs, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm fine with the line item. I just think it's should be classified under pupil services and not district wide. That's my opinion. I'm sure Chris would completely
Yes.
disagree with me.
No, he would not disagree with you. He would love to see that transferred out of his budget.
No, it would be into his budget.
Into-
Oh,
In-
oh,
It's in
no.
district
Oh,
wide now,
yeah, oh,
and
no.
I'm suggesting you go to pupil services.
oh,
But
no,
I'm
no,
trying
no.
to do that while Chris isn't here,
Yeah,
although he's here virtually. I'm trying to do while he's not here in person, so I
Not
can't
like
leave
that.
us there.
yes.
I just think it's that, like, one of these things doesn't belong in that category.
It's one of those silly mandates. That they should be responsible for giving us something back on.
Right, and that's why I'm saying flip it into
I,
pupil services.
I don't
that's where
disagree with you.
All that other stuff is.
If they're gonna insist upon it, they should pony up some money.
Right. Just seems like that odd man outline, that's all.
On the last two in district wide, 289 and 290, cafe, other supplies and cafeteria, other objects. I'm
Yep.
assuming obviously this is the extra money that we're putting into in case we don't find a full-time person and we have to continue with this. Don't we usually have a cafeteria, a food service? Don't we not usually have like a separate? Are they usually in district wide? Or is food service usually a separate
So
entity?
we've only had those two lines.
Right. Those are the only two cafeteria related lines that appear in the general fund budget. The cafeteria.
Deals with, I know they deal with their own
is
thing, but
separate, Right.
okay, so we've never really. Now, what about like what we were saying with the unpaid meals? Should that be ending up in here somewhere, or
Well, I
does
think
that
in the
still
past,
stay
you-
in theirs?
You may have taken it out of that other supply line. But we haven't had that in, well, I want to say 3 or 4 years. This is the first year now that it's back again. I
But the
think,
question is, if we don't hire or we don't get another person, shouldn't that be absorbed by the cafeteria budget?
technically,
At least most of it.
So,
I think what this is meant to represent is the excess that the district would have to pay beyond what we would have paid Lisa. if
That's
we
right.
Have to keep the vendor, and I can't believe I forgot.
I
but if you
can't
don't
think of
keep
either.
Lisa and you don't hire anybody, then,
It's still $40,000 more.
Or
Right,
the
but-
vendor's more expensive than. So the cafeteria budget, if you will. I think what we're saying here is we would make the argument that it would be able to fund what we would have paid Lisa.
Mm.
But if we have to keep the vendor, this is the excess.
But,
Okay,
but
so
the
it's-
cafeteria is not self-sustaining. We pay some of the healthcare.
Yeah.
But where does that appear? Is that? I mean, that, you handle that differently. Where does that appear in this?
There's another line, and at this point, we almost push all of the remember the 2 years ago, the board decided to push 70.
Yep.
70 or 75.
70.
So there is a help there, I'd have to find it.
Oh, okay,
There's
but
a
it is in
health insurance
here,
line, yes.
it is that part of the cafeteria to get
Because
something.
we pay, the cafeteria folks appear on the health insurance bill just like anyone else does. And then I push the expenses over with a monthly entry.
Yeah.
To their budget.
274 is district-wide health insurance, would it be that?
Yeah,
Right.
probably.
So 274.
But that's less the 70 that we
Right.
now have decided to let hopefully that the cafeteria, the cafe will cover. So we could, our option is to put the 40 into the caf and bring back 40 of the health insurance. So that doesn't stick out like a sore thumb.
Should also, there's something wrong with the spreadsheet calculation, because that should say 100%. Well, should show that that's an increase, but right now it's
Because, I
showing
mean-
0 increase.
In my opinion, they should be
Oh.
absorbing that cost.
Yeah, it's the divide by zero thing, so you have to pick if you're gonna either show that as 100% or 0%. And certain members of the Board of Finance prefer it one way. So it was done that way.
Okay, I see how it's supposed to go.
I don't know.
You can't serve two masters. Yeah.
He has to serve more than 2, but.
I better check to see that I have it the right way.
I would rather put that back into the cafeteria.
And reduce the allocation.
Yeah.
So we would only be pushing 30,000 of health insurance over?
I mean, that's my opinion.
But that's assuming we don't find anybody. If we find somebody, then it's gonna kind of
balance out.
go back the old way.
Yeah.
Right,
I would suggest you leave it like
Yeah.
this, just for now. Until we find if we find a director or not, you know what I mean? I mean, it's,
Yeah, 50/50.
but I agree with you, it belongs there.
Does belong there.
well,
But it won't be there if we find somebody.
Won't use it. If we find somebody, we won't need it there.
I mean,
Then the
If
Board
we
of
don't
Finance,
find someone,
Board of Finance is gonna grab that 40,000. Look, he's already got his
His ears pierced.
salivating.
could need some of it if it's a salary thing.
It's
Salary
going, yeah,
negotiation
it's not gonna, I don't think it'll be an even swap, but. it's-
I think we should leave it as a separate item for now until we figure out whether or not. If we're going contracted overall, I think there's other things that we need to. Look at. If we find a person, then it's there for us to. Move other places if needed.
Okay.
Rather than it disappearing off of it
it's
altogether.
up to the board. I mean, that's. Okay, moving on to the maintenance plant.
So did we lose a groundskeeper and gain a custodian?
this-
That's my question.
So what you're probably similar to what we saw with the paras.
Yeah.
These guys do occasionally move from bucket to bucket, and there's probably some historical. Some coding that needs to be corrected there. If you look at them in total and within that department, the salaries are just,
Right.
are up by
Mhm.
the expected.
And I'm assuming that when Bill presents his budget, he will have a backup schedule as to the increase in repair and maintenance.
Yes.
Yep.
One of it is something to do with coils.
The generator agreement, is one of the things, and there was recently
Something else he has to rebuild.
there are 4
Pumps?
Fuel pumps,
VFDs,
oh,
variable
frequency drives.
tanks.
Uh-huh.
That's it. 4 of them have recently failed. This just happened a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
and that was a $24,000 hit.
Okay, but he always has a backup schedule for us
Yeah.
anyway.
He does.
And what did you say we're paying for fuel and heating oil?
So
266.
here we're talking about heating oil. 266 per gallon in 26 versus 299
Mhm.
in 25. Just because this makes me happy. 348 and 24.
Um. Custodial salary, custodial overtime, and custodial substitute salary. Oh, if it's just me, but between the overtime and the substitute salary, I think we could just afford a couple more custodians.
That's true. However,
Um,
I think they're difficult to find. I know even the subs are difficult to find.
And then that doesn't assume benefits in this line, does
Right.
it? Yeah,
The subs in this.
Okay, I'm just, $80,000 between the two is kind of like,
well,
How many custodians
the
are?
summer help isn't in there. Is that a separate line or?
that's
that's
a separate line, 30,000.
It's right there.
But I'm looking at just the substitute salary and the overtime is 80,000.
It's a lot of money.
Although right now, we've maintained minimal overtime, correct, Bill?
Yes, especially over the summer. Which,
Well, that's
Bill
not
would
what,
tell you,
No.
sorry, that's not what the projected spend says. Projected spend says you're $8,000 over.
sorry, I'm talking specifically about the summer.
And
So
your
I'd have to look
substitute, you're right
about the
on,
summer.
56,000.
Because what?
So
We actually saw. We saw a downtick in overtime over the summer because we recently purchased a floor machine. That. And Bill would do this. Would serve this conversation better than me, but it was incredibly efficient. And helped the guys out in the summer. Did someone just ask how many?
Yes.
Custodians? was
Kristen,
it?
Kristen, did, yeah.
Just give me a moment, I can tell you. Just my other monitors.
14-inch or 12-inch, isn't doing it for you?
This is, I don't have my mouse, so. Now keep going, I'll come back to you.
So, well, sorry, I just wanna go, I wanna go back to that, because we're 56, which is. 10,000 over on the substitute from this year's budget, and 28, which is 8,000 over on the overtime on this year's budget as it is.
Mm.
I mean, open up a position. I'd almost rather be paying another person than be paying the overtime and the substitute.
no, you won't because of the health.
Yeah, the
insurance.
benefits end up being more.
That's the issue. And the FICA.
And you're still gonna need a substitute if he's out. You know?
It's just either that or we got.
But if you look at their salary structure, and we're gonna do that again shortly, I think Justin makes a good point. That it's not gonna come up to $80,000 right away.
Right.
It won't. Or it'll be close.
Oh, I beg to differ.
And then all the overtime, isn't all the workers' comp
Yeah.
calculated on regular hours and overtime hours?
Yes.
And so that might relieve some of that.
But we can.
Is the
cost it
overtime-
out.
You could cost it out, just for the heck of it, I would cost it out, an entry level, what they would get.
But isn't like overtime if there was like an emergency situation where people had to,
Yes.
so it wouldn't be, you would still have a substitute need because you still will have people out. You still will have an overtime need because there's always gonna be an emergency that'll happen.
If you get,
After
if we have one guy out and you have to call one guy in, if you're hiring another guy, you don't necessarily have to call somebody in. Because now you have an extra person.
That's
It's, you're always gonna need people, and we'll go back to the substitutes later, but you'll always.
But you're
need
always gonna
people.
have overtime.
Yeah, but I
For an
think,
emergency.
Which
so we've
happened
had
all the time.
$28,000 worth of overtime emergency this year, like. To me, that just.
So I don't know where we're, Sean and Dave, but those two come to mind right away when we have an emergency.
Right.
They're the ones that are gonna come in, and remember, it's a minimum of 4 hours when they come in. So,
And we could start getting snowstorms and then
Yeah.
overtime's all over the
Right.
place.
Mhm.
But when a water pipe breaks and they gotta come
Right.
in and clean it up,
You're not
you know,
gonna
whether
save the
it's,
overtime.
whether it's 20 minutes or 20 hours. It's
Right.
expensive. I think you're always gonna have it, but I still think it's a good idea to investigate,
Mhm.
uh. You know, what it would cost to bring another guy in,
Mhm.
because then these things would definitely go down. They wouldn't go away, but they'd definitely go
Go
down.
down, right?
What would go down is the substitute, and that is a savings of, let's say, $60,000, but you're not gonna hire a person. With all the payroll costs and health insurance. For
Yeah.
60,000.
But we can get it costed out and figure out what it is.
yeah, and then it's just a decision. Do you wanna
Right.
sub?
Yeah.
Or do you wanna hire someone?
Right, but you can do the calculation to satisfy yourself.
Well, if we're having a hard time finding sub custodians as it is,
Right.
Yeah.
So with that mindset, back in the day, if everybody remembers, we did that with our permanent substitute teachers,
Mhm.
where we couldn't get the day-to-day. and we ended
That
up-
was one of my questions.
Yes, so we have two at the middle school and one at Mary Art Fisher, is it just
Mhm.
Tina Nolan?
Mhm.
I think so, I think we have three district-wide. And maybe one at the high school, so it's like four.
Yeah.
Deb Shepherd,
Deb Shepherd, Lee Blanchett.
and there's a female at the middle school. And then Tina Nolan down at Mary Art Fisher.
And that may be good.
I have a question about, will Bill, he started last year or the year prior, the kind of the look ahead for maintenance, the 1 year, 5 year, 10 year
Yeah.
sort of situation. I
Yeah.
assume he's gonna bring that forth updated with things that got achieved and then what maybe is added onto the list for future stuff.
Yes. you
Track
will.
being one of them for long term.
There is money in, I forget where we put it, Bill, help me. But we did put money in for track maintenance in Bill's budget,
Yes.
right?
It's in repairs and maintenance.
Although we don't anticipate any.
Yeah, I don't think
next
there's
year.
anything that's supposed to happen within, I think, the first 5 or 10 years, Brian.
Yes, I
would
think
know
Brian
better
said
than I,
5.
but just to have it kind of as a placeholder with a,
but that was the full athletic facilities maintenance line item budget, right? That was supposed
Yeah,
to
we
go
bumped
towards,
it up.
towards refinishing the floors in the gyms, that
there was all
was.
kinds of stuff that he
Yep.
had on the list, yeah.
Yeah,
And I would assume like what that should have taken care of is the deep aeration and overseed of the elementary school athletic fields. Like, that's what I'm expecting. When I proposed that line item last year for track maintenance, for gym floor refinishing, deep seed and air rate of the elementary school soccer field, like that's the kind of stuff that I'm expecting that line to take care of.
okay.
Nice, we've already gone through transportation.
I have one
Okay,
more
one
on
more?
plan,
Okay.
Kathleen.
Sure.
Capital assets, age versus condition. We got that brand new truck this year. As a Board of Ed, I'm trying to plan on what's next. Lawnmower,
Oh, I don't know.
tractor. Are we doing another plow truck? What's next on the list from a capital asset perspective?
Mhm.
And we're gonna spend some, floor polisher, because those bad boys are getting up there in dollar amounts.
Yeah, we need to give something to the town. Now, they've got money for our lockers, so we need to give them.
But
So
yeah,
we-
that's separate from where I'm going from a
Long
specific,
term, yeah, just like.
long-term capital asset plan.
Plan.
Mainly from a vehicle, lawnmower, tractor,
Mhm.
snow blower, and I don't even know snow blower, but. Like,
I'll have him put it in the 5-year plan update as to where that should fall.
when is he gonna want another truck? And should we start talking to Amy now about, hey, the supervisor's truck that's at the DPW now. We're gonna buy that from you in 4 years, you guys gonna buy another one?
Mhm.
Kind of thing.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't know how hard that is to come up with, but.
All right, okay, we already talked about the transportation and you're going to look into the number of buses and.
I think it's worth a look at. I don't know if it's gonna change anything, but the numbers keep dropping and the ridership is off. So I just wanna be sure that, and sometimes we absorb a bus and it's broken down, and how come we're able to manage with that? And
Yeah.
so those questions are coming to mind.
Last year was crazy with broken down buses. Drop off and pick up.
Yeah, they're having a driver crisis this week. With athletics mostly.
Sorry, I have an athletics question. For 336, is it?
Yeah, that one and
Yeah.
the one below.
Why did it go up so much when we just spent all that money on the track equipment? What are they looking for? I know Deb's not here, but
Well, I took some money out of her line, so I'm not really sure.
I know she has rotations for like uniforms and things
Right,
like
but
that.
She
for
does.
replacement. I don't know if maybe this is a replacement uniform year or something for some team or.
Yeah, but we
It
just
looks
did.
like the co-op with Plainfield and
She had
football
like
is
a
going to
rotation.
is gonna ride, so there was a reduction there in our contribution, but then transportation went up, so I don't know how that balanced out.
What's Pro Tech?
Let's see, how's my question, what's Pro Tech?
Professional technical services.
Isn't it
Is it the refs and stuff?
the refs and stuff, yeah.
I'm in the wrong business. I can get a 28%
And-
increase year over year.
Now we have to dive into our actual sheets. There's a lot of.
Well, maybe we'll have to wait till Deb is
Yeah.
here and get some
okay, so
answers.
wait for that.
Isn't that also for the who's the healthcare person that's on site? What do we-
Oh, yeah,
Let it train.
the trainer, yeah.
Yeah, the
Right,
trainer.
right, Maybe.
Oh, yeah, the
Yeah, right.
weightlifter guy.
No.
No,
she-
this
she-
is
no,
to be out of
personal
game if a
trainer?
kid
Yes,
gets
her
hurt.
female, I can't think of her name right now.
It's, and I know it. It'll come to me,
Yeah.
but she's on, the BOE budget now. Before we contracted
Mm,
with another district or somewhere else, and now we've hired her. Serena,
so-
So is that what Pro Tech is, or we don't know?
I think it's
No,
there.
she wouldn't be in.
She's not there.
Okay,
Oh, wow.
so she's not in here?
So that's gotta be all the officials then.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I'll have to dive into what just to get to know.
Well, we'll wait for Deb.
Like $40,000, a 14. It's by far the only department that is up that high. I mean, special ed or pupil services is 10.4, athletics is 14.2, and we just spent $100,000 on that.
And I reduced that one.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, it's a lot, but I might have, you're going from 239 or 39,000 to 325, it's almost $100,000 increase over what we're gonna actually spend this year. That's more than 40%, double that, more than double.
She is adding, if you remember, Bill, volleyball with coaches and flag
That
football.
was relatively small,
It was small.
because it was, that's at the club level,
Okay,
so.
yeah.
so it was pretty
Yeah.
honest.
Well,
I'll wait for Deb. I'm sure she'll.
So when I have those kind of questions and we're in Bill's office with his double screen, he can go into Munis, click on something and open it up and tell me what's on the other side. A little more difficult here,
mhm.
and then we have to go back and look it up.
Okay, well, we'll get our questions answered.
We have our lists.
I got a real dumb one for you. Why are all the telephones, the cell phones, all like different amounts?
It depends on the contract. For example, if I remember right, the secretary's contract is $25 a month.
Correct.
Right, I got that, but Spinelli's getting 1,020, Bill's only getting 1,000. Somebody else here is getting 1,000.
It depends on what's either in your
But
contract.
none of those
or
guys have contracts.
Your employment agreement. I think Deb's was, I think it's in her employment agreement. She actually, for whatever reason, is the
It's in
highest
Bill's
one.
employment
And I
agreement,
think it's
too.
probably because she uses it both for school and for AD stuff.
Yeah,
If I had to guess.
but I know Eileen and I have reached out to the Verizon, whoever, our sales rep, to try to reel that in and get one.
I would
Better
just think
price.
that they'd be similar.
It really, I know, for example, I think the secretaries are asking to increase that.
To
their-
50,
their
yeah.
Reimbursement from 25 to 50.
Yep.
In their upcoming
I
negotiation.
think I wrote you a note about
Yeah,
that.
you did.
Yeah,
That's why it sticks in my head.
Right.
And $20,000 for telephones, landlines.
Oh, that's just a reimbursement on their personal phone.
I don't know.
Yeah, but he's
Correct.
talking about
Yeah.
he's talking about landlines.
And then on top of all these cell phone reimbursements, it's $20,000 on landlines. Like when you look at the overall communications budget of the district, it's pretty crazy.
and remember that the telephones about, Heather, 5 years ago, we got that grant, remember that big Alliance Capital grant? And we spent, what, $130,000 on upgrading the whole system, and Bill's telling me that the whole system that we have now can't be supported for much longer. And that's gonna be, we're gonna be right back to having a bigger discussion about landlines.
Yeah, well, I'm having the same thing at work and I'm getting new phones. Curious to figure out, not as many phones as here, but they don't support it anymore.
But they sort of knew.
Yeah, well, I got a machine that's sort of new and I had to spend almost $1 million because they're not gonna support it anymore.
That's craziness.
Mm.
Questions on that, on high school athletics?
No. I'm doing for them.
Okay, we'll move on to tech.
Luckily, Heather's here.
Yeah. Any questions on that? Pretty much kept it in line.
I mean, the only significant jump is the one there, the 344. What does that include? Technology, admin, technology services.
Line 344.
So that's mostly our tech service contracts. Something I included this year was, our new antivirus with the cybersecurity platform, which we do not currently have. And then some of our switches. Apex did not charge us this year for the maintenance contract on those. And just sent me a bill. Obviously, I can't pay that because I didn't budget for it. So I had to put that in for next year. CrowdStrike with the cybersecurity bundle is 14,000.
All those potential software upgrades, things like that, cared for in this time. Hardware upgrades are also cared for. You, Infrastructure wise, grant wise, I know there was grants that came in this year on tech.
Yeah, the majority of those were, used for the auditorium. And then my E-rate, which is infrastructure, I spent all that. I'm waiting next year for them to hopefully open up a new round. So I could use that for switches, and wireless access points. Our server is only 2 years old, so we're good with our servers. And our switches are getting to be about 5 years old, so I need to probably put those next year's budget.
So can I ask from you the same thing we just asked for from Bill? Which is a 1, 3, 5-year plan of capital assets that are gonna need to get. We know the consume, I'm gonna call it a consumable, right? The Chromebooks and laptops. We know we have a replacement plan for those. We have that larger infrastructure that we gotta start planning for. Especially if things get pushed to 6 instead of 5G and 6G, and they're talking about 800 again, so. I would hate for us to get stuck and have to a 6G upgrade when devices are only gonna come 5G and 6G.
Does that mean new cable and all?
No, that just means new access points, Wi-Fi access points. 'Cause there is talk about dumping the 2.5G bands on new technology.
That's better than, my second year here where you pull new wire for the whole complex. Yeah.
Everything's going wireless, come on. It'll work great through concrete walls and metal ceilings. On that, Belinda, I could have swore that we had this discussion at some point, maybe it was last year's budget, but camera systems.
Yeah,
There's some
so,
discussion about that.
so Bill didn't put that in his, budget. We are anticipating that there is another security grant coming out. So we are eagerly waiting for that, and that is what our focus is on the camera system.
Is that on a separate isolated network from the regular?
And some of the new technology can take some of the existing cameras and then make them cloud accessible. I don't know what we've been buying recently. I know we have about 6 on another system.
Yeah. Except that one.
Yeah.
System.
Does that fall under plant or tech?
So it straddles both. And security, it's actually a 3-prong kind of adventure. So I've been hearing on the state level that security grant is due to come out. I just haven't seen anything yet.
I'm just wondering where are we gonna see it in here? Is it gonna be under plant? Is it gonna be under tech? There's not a security department line, so.
So we don't have anything in there, and typically if we need repairs to the system, it comes out of Bill's line.
Okay.
But Heather supports the tech end of it.
To make it work.
Okay. Just wanna make sure it's cared for somewhere,
Yes,
because I know the administrations rely on them pretty heavily. so.
we do rely on it pretty heavily.
Danny likes to see when I walk up to the front door.
We're more concerned about those little dead spaces here and there that need additional cameras.
I'm good. Sorry, Kathleen. Thank you.
No more questions? Okay, we'll move on to English as a second language, or ESY. 60.
Did we skip middle school athletics? Are we just skipping it because Deb's not here?
Hmm?
Did we skip middle school athletics?
No, nobody had any questions on it.
Oh, I thought we were still on tech, sorry. The
Oh, we
55,
did. Okay, sorry about that.
yep, the pro tech on the,
Yeah, it's the same question.
Same
but-
Same question, we don't
Sure,
know
I
the
got
answer to
that.
it, so we'll wait till Deb is here.
Well, Bill and I will start working on this list. And hopefully be able to give you some answers, and then when the directors and principals
Mhm.
present, if there's something we missed. We'll have them address it.
Oh, curriculum development, any questions on that one?
So curriculum went up because of the CNA.
Mm-hmm.
Absorption of that. Curriculum takes on a lot of different, not only, textbooks, but pool time, scuba equipment came out of there, whatever's new that needs to support the curriculum falls there. Along with professional development, PDEC, the curriculum council meetings, and then just, of course, general professional development. So it's utilized. We did have to bump it up because of the basically the CNA. And there's another program that we're running this year called Mini Med. It is a program out of Yale University where 5 of our students are actually going to work with doctors at Yale University. It's inexpensive for the entire semester. I think it's $300 a student, actually less than VHS, but they're going to have doctors mentoring each one of I think it's all females, the 5 females that are gonna be working, and it's kind of like a capstone project for them. New program. We're pretty excited that 5 girls have signed up for it, so. Beyond CNA, it's more medically based, and Kim Steglitz has been working hard with the doctors at Yale to make sure that that's up and running.
So are we, I know you were kind of surveying the students and seeing what pathways really are warranted
Yep.
in terms of interest and cost, and trying to just make sure we're being wise with what we're picking. And I know that there was the thought for vet tech and possibly an education pathway future.
Yep.
Are we not planning for that for next year, or is that built into here somewhere, or?
So it'll definitely come out of the curriculum line in general, so I'm assuming in my mind that I have to set some money aside for that. The one thing I'm working on first is the CDC certification for education. And I'm hoping to get some grant money for that. Another program I'm really looking at is Educator Rising. It's another curriculum. I think it's a $6,000 one-time fee. So I am looking at that depending on which way we go. Do we go to CDC certification and I get grant funding? I might just lean in that direction. Or the Ed Rising program is exceptional. It's very good. And then the other thing is Vet Tech. Vet Tech is a 30-week program. It's like $29.50 a student. And I don't know where in the population of students. It would have to be a junior or senior level class. And I don't know if I have enough students right now in those 2 classes interested, but I do have a meeting, is it next week, Danielle?
Yeah.
With Connecticut State to work on that. So that's all in the pipeline. I would love to fall into some grant money for that.
so on that note, I have a note to myself here saying grant, off grant, and future funding. So there was a lot of talk tonight about that was on a grant, now we're funding it in-house. Right, I think the welding program was one of them.
Supplies for the welding program,
Right.
yes.
So what I'm trying to understand is how much of that grant funding that we've had years past has now fallen on us. It doesn't need to be an answer tonight, just a rough number. I'd like to understand that. And then how much of that did we offset by either getting rid of something else or lowering some other line item? And then I think the question for the future is, if we do get grant funding for, say, one of these, the CDC program that you're talking about, we should start thinking about what that's gonna look like next year, year after, if there's no grant available for it. I think the programs that we have here are great, the pathways that we have here are great. But I don't wanna see other viable programs start to take a hit because we're trying to prop up these programs that we're keeping, I'd like to make sure that everything's staying funded appropriately.
I think one of the things, and I wrote to it in the Villager, is, we have to keep on top of labor trends. And, if for some reason, I don't know, construction falls off, then where are we gonna put our dollars so that we have that flexibility? And then there's so many pathways that we can sustain. We can't offer everything. And so at some point, I think we're hitting that saturation level right now. Because adding these other two means we have 15 potential pathways for our students, and we have 174 students. So I think we're gonna get to that point, but then we have to be flexible enough to say, okay, we're gonna drop scuba because that's not viable for our students, and now we're gonna pick something else up. I think it's just always staying on top of what the need is in the region.
Well, and it being on a 4-year pathway, that makes it tough to shuffle that without,
I get it.
it's like
Yeah.
you picked your major the first day of college and you get to senior year and the major's no longer offered.
So what Kim is working on this year, Kim Stedlitz, is that we've made a determination that in order to get a pathway designation on your diploma, like a little seal, you've had to complete 3 pathway programs. So I understand where you're talking, where if you have somebody that's going through the system at the high school, you got to make sure that they're able to complete those, like firefighting, right? That we're able to complete those 3 classes and then phase it out and bring something else in. So we've been talking a lot about that, what to potentially phase out down the road and then what to pick up. But because this is all we have, I would say the big equipment purchases have been done. Culinary, welding, I don't think there's much else we're gonna have to do as far as infrastructure.
But we've got continued supplies in the welding department. Some of that stuff has a life cycle that
Yes,
is gonna have to get maintained or swapped out or
I see what you're saying.
upgraded,
Or
the-
inspected and
Right.
everything else, right? Yeah.
I mean, depending on how many hours are going on those welders, they should get inspected, we've got, there's other pieces of that. That I think we're gonna need to make sure we're planning for along with the other 1, 3, 5-year stuff.
Yeah, a good example of that was just the tank filling for the gases for
Mhm.
welding. That had to find its way into Mike Joyce's budget, so.
I mean, a storage and swap program with Hair Gas or one of the local partners. Things like that start to help make those transitions softer if we can get into them.
Yeah. For sure. I'm not shy about asking for money, that's for sure.
And I think, going back to the partners that we had, if Electric Boat, maybe they didn't fund it this year, but maybe they're gonna put a program back together next year where they're gonna start getting some funding on things and. Maybe it's not major equipment, but maybe it's smaller piece grants. Those are the pieces that we need to keep looking at.
Well, we have the director from the American Welding Society coming next week to visit. They gave us 25,000. I'd love to chat with him about more funding. So, yeah, keeping those partners and keeping close to them is a full-time job between Mike and I.
And I don't even, more funding is great, but I think at this point, we're looking for long-term continuous funding. Right? How can we get standing up a program and leaving it up? Dave Kimball with the CNAs, they were great to get us started and, it's appreciated, but we need some long-term support on stuff like that
Yes.
to keep it going.
Because there's only so much money that the community can support.
Mhm.
And we understand that.
My last question. And I promise I will not ask a single other question. What was our starting number? Like. What's the big number in the big white book?
I like how he's like staring. at me.
I know.
So.
Cause I asked this
Let's-
question last year and we got a round number and I was like, oh.
So,
that's cool.
you gotta understand how these budgets are built, because some people, and rightly so,
Wish list.
feel like it's a wish list, right? And so then it's my job as superintendent to go through the wish list and say, okay, this is the direction the district's moving, or, okay, this is nice, you want, I don't know, 13 new digital cameras. Well, I think we'll start with 7. So it was up over $2 million.
Was the increase to last year's was +2, okay. No, I'm not asking it maliciously, I'm asking it because this is what our teachers feel that they need. And I think that's important for the community to understand. This is what our teachers, boots on the ground, in the classroom every day, think that they need. They need 2 million, we cut it down to less than 1 million. We'll probably get it down a little bit more from that.
Right, but maybe even more importantly is to explain that to the Board of Finance, because it sometimes
That gets lost.
this doesn't even get to the people for a vote, you know what I mean? It gets chopped more before the people even get a say. And
So teacher, principal, like I for many years, right? So I know how to, what we do at the building level, right? And I can remember wanting a full-time librarian, and the answer every year was no, but I'll give you 0.1. And I was a building principal for 8 years. By the time I left, I had a full-time librarian, but it took me 8 years to get it because the superintendent would say, okay, you're getting another 0.1. And so I guess that's how we have to build those things. So if a teacher wants 13 digital cameras and I say, okay, let's try for half, and we might end up with 5, but at least we're responding to what the teacher put in their budget. So we don't basically go through and just say, I don't go through and just say, you know, we're not buying that. It's just that maybe everything is in moderation, right? And we have to build up to the amount of supplies or equipment that we need. For the most part, the biggest amount of money came out of staffing when we looked at staff reductions, and we had to make that balance, right? To keep some of those things in the teachers' budgets, we had to really look at staffing and say, enrollment's dropping, we're gonna have to make a hard decision about reducing some positions. And honestly, if you look at it through attrition and some other things, it's not that many employees that are, it's like down to 2. But that's kind of how we did it. It was more in looking for big numbers in staff, rather than really nitpicking the teachers' budgets.
Yeah, I guess I'm going at it from a perspective of, it's the 2 million, you know, that book started at 2 million plus Bill's list at X million, right? I mean, if we got all the HVAC done in the school tomorrow, it'd be 26 million plus, right? We know that. Understanding all of the pressures, I think is good for both the Board of Finance to know and our communications out to the community.
well, just that, everybody has done their due diligence, so, all the your admins have, they have done that, you've done it, we've done it, and then it goes to the Board of Finance. It's a very sharpened pencil by the time
It
it's
really
presented
is.
to,
Very small.
yeah, exactly.
Well, Bill and I talked about it just the other day and said, okay, so it inevitably, right, the number that the board puts forward will be somewhat reduced, and we're looking at each other. Okay, where?
Well, I mean, the town is still reeling from I know, the reval. And then I think it's going to be a tight year for an increase.
I think we were a little, you never know what's in that budget, that book, until Bill tallies it all. And Eileen, on the other hand, a shout out to her for really putting an organizational structure to that. But
Phenomenal job by Eileen this year, the changes on the processing side, it was outstanding work.
But you don't know until he tallies everything up, and then it's like,
I know.
But when you look at this summary page, and you look at the numbers that have already been the elementary schools, -5.3%. Right, overall, but pupil services is up 10 and athletics is up 14. You gotta sit here and say, okay. We're doing everything we can at the basic education level to balance those schools. Every one of those balanceable lines is balanced. What's going on in athletics and what's going on in pupil services, and those are the questions that we've asked, and that's what we have to figure out. Curriculum was easy to explain, right? There's a lot more pieces to the pathways puzzle that we need to be able to put into our budget. But some of those other pieces are,
And hopefully we're gonna get all those answers, and if we miss something along the way, Bill and I, then the directors and principals should be able to clarify. You know, what you don't see is the reading teacher, because we're hoping to parlay a part-time one into the Alliance grant. So I've had that conversation with TJ. We didn't give it up. It's just that we're gonna try to figure how it doesn't impact the BOE budget.
and one more, the continued OG training.
Mhm.
That's in here, right?
It's in Title II, actually.
Okay,
So, and we already have a good group of teachers that already want that PD.
okay,
So.
yeah. I just wanna make sure that continues, because that's been an extremely successful program, in my opinion.
A lot of hard work on the teacher's part, but yes.
And our students are benefiting from it hand over fist.
Needle is moving and kids are becoming confident readers, and that's what we want.
It's a great system.
We got a good team at Marriott Fisher really running that, and a good consultant. So I'm proud of that program, and thank God for those teachers that are putting themselves through that professional development, because it is a intense program.
Okay, any further comments? No citizen comments, anything from the Zoom audience? Okay, Mr. Herbert, you can be
I
recognized.
just got two quick ones. if I
Oh.
may. And this was just from the first page, district-wide, it talks about offset by lower BOAG and middle college. I thought we ended our relationship with middle college.
So we still have to, there's still a school of choice, so we still have to pay tuition for those kids. There's 3 there now,
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Okay,
but we don't provide transportation.
okay.
So
Oh.
that's why that number came way down.
And then the last one is, and I'm just curious, anything, the scuba pool time expense, where's that pool?
Plainfield, a town of Plainfield, and they hardly charge us.
I just didn't know if it was at the Y, but I was just wanted to be sure it wasn't at another pool in town.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm well aware of that.
Yep.
But actually, the pool at Plainfield, they have a lifeguard that's there for us. And they have been wonderful to work with and very flexible with Mr. Fontaine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just two quickies.
Mr. Herbert.
My first question was, where did you start at, which is.
Eh,
I wonder on the special ed history, because or the projection, the volatility issues, right, it was, I believe a couple of years ago, we presented a slide or two showing how we had estimated what a special ed would cost, and how many out-of-placement students we would have, and how we never estimated high enough.
Right,
I still remember that slide. I don't remember the number slide, but that slide. And I think that was sort of getting at your comment. How do we guess that we never get, I guess maybe one year we guessed.
yes.
Well, yeah, we guessed we budgeted a little bit more, but that has not been the history by law. In terms of the presentation, a couple things from my viewpoint, I'd suggest. When you talk about things like, and I know you built the budget based on the departments. That's how I would build it too. But it would be interesting to me to know what salary impact is for this entity. As opposed to, I know the high school is going up, the middle school is going up less or more.
Actually, well, I can definitely expand on it, Steve, but in my opening comments, when I talked about the object view That's what I was trying to get at. So I wanted to open the conversation with a trend, a discussion of trends
Mhm.
on an object view. And then I went into how those sort of affect, so I'll try to be a little more
Well,
overt.
I guess what I'm thinking of is, the request is, $950,000 more,
Right,
is 200,000 of that salary increase.
Right.
You know,
And that
could be
actually
part of
gets
one or the other.
to the, I think last year we might have been calling it the reconciliation sheet, which essentially rolls from one budget to another by object essentially. And that's still, it will be part of the presentation.
And hey, I hate comparing to the budget.
I know you do.
I want to compare against what we expect to spend, and let me give you an example, if I can find it. It was the fuel cost, item 327.
Yep.
It's actually going up. I thought you said prices were going down. In other words, we're gonna spend, if I understand this correctly, but maybe it's announced to this, we're going to spend $85,000 this year. And costs per gallon are going down, but we're going to spend $102,000. We're asking for $102,000 next year. And that's why I like to look at the expected versus what we want, or what you want. And that, to me, is more important than what we guess we needed for the current year and what we're gonna guess we need for next year. So, to me, I think that's, for me, that's a much more meaningful
Right,
comparison.
And I
And
think,
I know it's not for everybody, but it's for me.
I think we talked about this a little bit last year on the town side too.
Yeah.
That projected spend, I would request some patience on that because we are halfway through the year. And I'm looking at what we've spent so far, what we have encumbered, which is at best an imperfect picture because
Sure.
there's sometimes there are just situations where somebody hasn't put the encumbrance up yet.
Right.
Well, there's something that we buy at the end of the year. So, you know, in that situation, in that specific situation, I possibly could have gone a little low.
Yeah,
low
again,
on
maybe the
usage.
estimate for the current year is off
Right,
or
it's
something,
low,
but
right.
that is more meaningful, you know, when you say fuel costs are gonna go down because of the negotiations. That's wonderful, but this shows the opposite.
Right.
And I'm not trying to pick on that, I know it's really a terrible example,
No,
but there are a lot of other ones where the current year expectation tells us more about what we need next year than last year's budget.
And I agree with Steve, when I do my budgets, it's everything's the trailing 12 months. And it gives you a real kind of a snapshot. And some months you're gonna spend more heating oil, some less, you have the budget, but it's the real money that you've spent. And I like looking at it that way too, but that's.
Yeah, and that's why we have the projected spend in there. I guess what I'm saying is that
Mhm.
that projection is imperfect.
I think maybe the gap that Steve's getting at, and it's a gap that just light bulbed over my head, is how do we do on last year? Right? I mean, that's a gap we never see. The last year's actual versus budget. Right? We never see how well we did we know we did well because we ended up with 465 in the plus. But how well did we do? And we
Well,
never really see
what
that.
You have seen
What
that
accounts actually
several
make a difference?
times. Oh, sorry, I'm getting excited. Year end, as we report the results at year end, you see that every month.
But we don't see it we don't see it object line by object line, right? We don't see it in,
Oh, I think we do.
see it in this format.
Yeah.
Right? But we see it in the object line by object line format.
At year end, yep.
Yeah. we do.
And why you don't see it on this sheet is because experience has shown, specifically on the town side. When the sheet gets so big.
Yeah, sure.
You really can, so we actually try. This has been developed through the last 3 years of what the board seemed to prefer to focus on.
We,
But to get at it, if you're interested in looking at that cut, if you look at sort of our reporting towards year end. It does break it out by object, and so far, knock on wood, because the audit's still going. That surplus has held at least to this point.
No, I think this is a great worksheet for what we do. I was just.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the best way to see that information.
If I might make, one more comment. You mentioned expulsions as a cost of special ed. Usually not, many people think special ed should be for, but are there a large number of students in that category?
In special,
I have no clue.
Behavior related, like,
Outplaced.
means
by disabilities,
Justin was talking about that the expulsions and the cost for educating these students, because I guess some of them are educated off-site, so is that a substantial number? Are there a lot of students in that category, or is it? I was going to guess.
behavior
So-
related.
so expulsions aside, because that could just be a policy violation, right? So, and not necessarily special ed, so we'll put that to one side, but the number of students, Chris and I just had a very long discussion about this last week. The number of, and he'll talk about this when he does his presentation. The number of students that are experiencing at-home trauma is so intense at this point in time that it is taking a tremendous amount of resources. And when students experience trauma in the home, and then they come to school and we're asking them to sit and learn when they don't have the wherewithal to do that because they have so much other stressors, we're trying to put wraparound services around the students so that they can access the curriculum and be in a classroom and be productive. But behaviors, because of that trauma, are significantly impacting the learning environment at Thompson Public Schools. And, you know, we talk about, we believe that we are providing a very good special education program here. Chris holds the line when he can, because sometimes when we feel appropriate education, a parent or an advocate might believe otherwise.
Sure.
And we need to come to terms as a team as to how to best support the child. But the whole idea of, and he will speak about this better than I can, but the intensity of the trauma coming from the homes right now is taxing the district. And the words he used to me last Friday was, "We are in crisis mode." And I haven't heard those words from him, I think, in my entire career working with him. So the intensity of what we can't necessarily remediate at school, even though we're doing our best to provide those services, is concerning. Because you see that contracted service line go up and up and up. And that's our response to the trauma. So when you say our behaviors escalating, yes, as a result of some of that home environment.
It was more about the cost of those services provided for expelled students.
So
Brought up as an issue, and I just wondered if there were a lot of the students in that category, but it sounds like it's much more nuanced.
Maybe 1 or 2 a year of expulsion,
Okay, all right.
maybe 1 or 2 a
And
year.
I might have used that word incorrectly. It was expulsion and behavior impacting the classroom that forced an outplacement,
Correct.
right? It may not be termed expulsion because that's a
Policy.
policy violation, but behaviors that impact the classroom that force us to put that student in an outplaced environment.
Because we don't have the therapeutic wraparound services that we can provide in a public school setting, right? And you got to worry about everybody else in the classroom that needs to learn too.
And that falls under the pupil service.
Right, so
It's
but
changed so much over the years that it's now substantially different than it was when I went to school.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I struggle with, and it may be, I'm not questioning that, just a struggle. What has really changed fundamentally to make that? It really has nothing to do with our meeting here tonight.
But it's not only behavioral, it's also, any service if we cannot provide it here, then they have the right to go somewhere else. If they're blind, if they're deaf, if they're severely dyslexic, if it's a behavioral issue, there's a ton of different reasons for them to go out. And
But those number of blind students, I don't think has changed as a percent from when I went to high school or grade school. And now,
oh, I'm agreeing, and that's why I said earlier that that stuff has remained fairly static.
Yeah.
But is it a lot of kids moving out? In 2017, did we have 5 families move in? That volatility, the up and down that we cannot plan on.
Oh, no.
And that would be interesting to know. But if we have a blind student, we have a blind student from pre-K to 12. And that's not really volatile at all.
Some, yeah, some of the
No,
data
but
Chris
prior
will
to
share is
whatever year,
by disability, numbers by
state
disability.
paid for that student. Up
Pardon me?
until the state used to pay, when we were in school, the state paid for that student to go
Yeah,
to another, like Perkins School for the Blind or whatever. Now, the town pays for that.
Kristen.
Excuse me, I think part of it too is that we're better now as a society about
Yes.
identifying students, and maybe there was probably a lot of kids. I mean, it has increased. Oh, I agree with you. But I think it's partly just that there was probably kids struggling that should have been getting services that just weren't.
Better.
And maybe you had more dropouts,
That's
that's
true,
just my personal.
especially with dyslexia and
Yeah.
reading problems. I think
Well-
that's increased, yes. ADHD.
I think
you
from
know.
a behavior perspective, I think we've noticed it just listening to some of the stuff the administrators come in and talk about. You listen to the news every day. There are so much social pressures that are going on outside of these walls.
Yeah.
There's parents that are struggling to make ends meet because they've both got jobs and. It's not a stay-at-home mom that gets the opportunity to tutor her kid when she gets home at the end of the day, or stay-at-home dad. We no longer have, families are spread out a lot more. There's not grandparents in town to assist with this because that family has decided that they're gonna go, 2 states over. So I think there are a lot more factors with regards to that. There's also the whole technology aspect that didn't even exist when I was going to school. That if I had the technology aspect when I was going to school and that was on me now, I don't know that school would have been as successful as it was.
But
So,
philosophically speaking, all of those problems at home, how much is the school responsible for?
I
How much do we have to do
absorb
this?
I-
And the lunches and
Yep.
the psychologists and the counselors, how much of that are we really, and it's us as a society, us as a town, we're paying for that. That's real dollars.
Yep.
And a lot of it I have issues paying for.
Yep.
But what are you gonna do, right?
Well, and that's where I think the pupil services line, as we've discussed around this table multiple times, needs to be looked at by the state more.
Mhm.
Putting that, look, it starts at home. It does, Bill, and I don't disagree with you there. It starts at home. But if it's not happening at home, it shouldn't fall directly on your neighbors to foot that bill.
Which is what I'm saying. So, maybe it's not so much the reimbursement, but that 4.5 times, maybe that shouldn't be 4.5 times, the per pupil.
Yeah.
Maybe it should be
Expenditure, yeah.
3 times. Or
Well, who knows what?
who
the
knows? I don't
percentage
know.
would be,
I
who
wouldn't even
knows?
know how to change that.
Or maybe it should
But
be
that would give us a heck of a lot more money than a reimbursement after $90,000.
or based on the demographics, the census demographics of the town, like they do our congressional representation.
But we all know 25% of our students are getting specialized services for learning. And then on top of that, another 70 students are receiving some type of an accommodation. So a third of your population here requires something other than regular ed instruction.
And what was the last, and I don't want this to be construed as correlating, but what was the last poverty number for the town of Thompson?
Oh, it's way
Our
up there.
free and reduced is like at 42%.
Yeah.
And I bet it could be higher if everybody did their. I bet it could be higher.
But there is a correlation.
I know, I don't want to imply that there is, I know there is
There
one, I
is.
don't want to imply there is.
But I think overall as superintendent and the work that the teachers and Chris and everybody that, I honestly think that we're doing the best we can. Those external factors are difficult to remediate here in school.
Mhm.
And we see a lot of depression, anxiety, hence we're in that mental health grant with CIRAC. We're just seeing that being very prevalent, and it could be a result of societal technology, God knows what. But we're just noticing that it's really taxing the service providers that we have here because we have more and more students that require that type of support.
Hey, whole budget season, Steve, or just today?
You got a long ride home, you can.
Any more comments, questions?
Motion adjourned.
Second.
We're done.